Hello, everyone. Now that we had a lesson on how to say my name. This is me. I am a designer, front-end developer, illustrator. I do a bunch of things. But one thing that I really like seeing when I go to conferences is I really like seeing people's stories and hearing their stories. So we're going to have a little bit of story time with Yuna. I hope that you're ready. And we're also going to have some real talk. So I hope that's OK with y'all as well. Let's talk about innovation. Historically, innovation has come from three sources. So the first is from large corporations. So think like Bell Labs, Xerox PARC. When corporations have enough money to pay to bring together a lot of people with great ideas, they can create really great technology and great products. The second is through government funding. So this is where we get things like the ENIAC computer. And that's when the government decides something is valuable enough for the people that we want to put money into it, and we're willing to spend some of our tax money. And that's the second way. So then the last way is open source. And this talk is about open source. But first, we're going to start talking about that first one. And the first one is corporations. We're going to talk about this guy. So do y'all know who this is? He's a little underground, but don't worry, he's up and coming. Bill Gates. And Bill Gates co-founded Microsoft, which is the second highest grossing company to this day. Double check my facts. So traditionally, he's known as this really intelligent genius who just rose out of the ashes of his lines of Red Bull from his computer and created the PC revolution. But that's not true. There wasn't Red Bull. It's not true at all. So a little bit of backstory. So Bill Gates had a pretty blessed life. His family was pretty well off, and he got to go to Lakeside Academy, which was this great preparatory school when he was 13 years old, and he did really well there. And the really unique thing about the school was that they had a computer science program for middle schoolers. And in 1960, at a time when most universities didn't even have access to a single computer terminal. And the reason why was because there was this mothers club that had a rummage sale, and they earned enough money to get a terminal. They bought computer time from GE, and they set it up. So there was this computer club. This is a picture of Gates and Paul Allen, who he met there. And they started just hacking away and became really obsessed with computer programming and really learning about it when it was just starting out. So they would sneak into the university, which was across the street, 3 in the morning, trying to get some computer time because it was expensive. And through connections, whenever they got kicked out of the lab, people understood that they had talent. So they ended up getting paid to be the first bug and pseudo testers of the system. So by the time that Gates graduated high school, he had over 10,000 hours, which is the number that Malcolm Gladwell says you need to become an expert in a field. So he had this huge advantage over anybody else. And it's cool because if you think about it, it wasn't the individual, it was the community that surrounded him. He's in that bottom left-hand corner, by the way. It was the community that surrounded Gates that allowed for the PC revolution to happen. So that's exciting. It's not an individual, it's the people around him that make this possible. So isn't that cool? Isn't that exciting? But what if there were 20 13-year-old boys that had that kind of access at the time? What if there were 20 kids, 20 13-year-olds who came from all different backgrounds, different mindsets, different histories, who had that kind of access? What if there were 200 or 2,000 of them? What kind of world would we live in today? How many Microsofts would there be? How many different competing companies would there be? What kind of technology would we have? Let's talk about diversity for a second. We all know that diversity in tech is pretty bad. But diversity in open source is really bad. Here's a study that was done a couple of years ago on diversity in GitHub teams. And they surveyed 23,493 projects, which is a lot. That's a lot. They found that, as expected, they even said, 75.3% of the projects had no team gender diversity at all in any quarter in the entire existence of that project period. That's a lot. They also found that there was a small but significant positive effect on productivity when you had that kind of diversity. So it just shows us that the world that we could have is much richer than the world that we currently have settled for. Because the world that we have settled for, it's broken. The open source initiative is a great opportunity that we have. Who here works on an open source project? Do any of you? Awesome. Who here uses open source? Okay, better question, hands down. Who here does not use an open source project at all? Okay, good. I don't see a single hand, which means I know that none of you are lying, which is really nice. It's nice to hear. So I love open source too. I use it all the time. I've had some great experiences with it. I've built some things. I've worked with people on things. But open source is broken, and we have to fix this. We can fix this. One of the things that I try to explain to people in why we need design in this community is the story of the road. And the story of the road is told as, it starts from, I heard it when Google was trying to do this Design Founders program. It has 3 characters. So you have the business person who says, okay, we need to build a road. We need to get from point A to point B. And then the business person goes to an engineer, and the engineer says, yes, let's build a road. Let's build it with this brand new anti-stripping agent so that we won't have to work on it for years and years, and it'll be really sturdy, it'll last for a long time. So then the designer comes in, and the designer says, those are all great ideas. Let's also build this road along the coast so that people can enjoy the ride for years and years to come. And when you have that kind of diversity just in thinking, it creates better outcomes, as we can clearly see here. Here's another study that was done, and some of these people are the same people from the first study, but they have since iterated on it. This is a different study. And they looked at how gender diversity improves products. It improves productivity. And they found that inconsistent with information processing theory, a diverse team comprised of men and women and more and less experienced people brings different perspectives together. And that's why it improves outcomes. So it's really those perspectives that we are craving in this community. And it's not just the gender diversity. Where are the designers at? Designers work in tech. They work in the same products that we're working in. Yet you don't really find designers involved in the open source community at all. So let's look at why. There's a designer. His name is Mike Monteiro, and he gave a really famous talk at the 2011 Creative Mornings in San Francisco. And his talk was, "Fuck you, pay me." It's something that designers have kind of been bred with. Throughout design school, they're taught that they need to make somebody respect them, respect their time, and get paid for their time. So when you first introduce this idea of open source to a designer, they're like, why would I do that? They get this knee-jerk reaction to doing free work. The second barrier is what I like to call the museum effect. And this happens when you just don't want to break anything. It actually comes out of empathy for something. It comes out of respect. It's because it's such a beautiful picture and painting that I'm not going to just take it off the wall or lean against it. I respect it. I don't want to break it, so I'm not going to touch it. And that's why when designers first enter this world of Git, they don't want to touch anything, because they don't want to break your hard work. There's a little similar but different, and it's unfamiliarity paralysis. So it's the opposite of what happens when we have all these options and frameworks, and you just don't know where to get started because you don't know what to choose. You can also have this paralysis when you don't know where to look to get started, when you're just completely unfamiliar with the topic. And then there's the lovely, lovely design by committee. I don't know if I have to say much about that. It's a terrible thing. So this last point is just not in the peripheral. Currently, open source, GitHub, is not a design tool at all. And it's something that we as developers see all the time, but as a designer, it's something that you hear about in the foreign distance. So I wanted to fix this. We should do things about this. So the first thing is we need to encourage a more open designer-developer workflow. And the second thing is that we have to foster design participation in the open source community once we've done that first thing. How do we do the first thing? My answer to that is Git. And I think Git is a really great tool for not just versioning, but it's a great design tool. It's a great tool to collaborate and bring together people. But oftentimes when I tell a designer, hey, we should use Git for our project, the reaction is, oh, fuck, no. That's just not my thing. That's not from me. I don't know where this accent's coming from. But anyway, I wanted them to understand that Git was their friend. It's something that they shouldn't be scared of. It's not something that's intimidating. It's something that we can use and work with. So I set up this Gulp starter environment just to create kind of the things that CodePen was bringing and put it into GitHub so we can start working together. And I included things like auto prefixer. I set up Sass so that they wouldn't have to do that. Did a couple of performance optimizations with images and browser sync, which is just magical when something automatically reloads. And so all that my designers have to do on my team is type gulp in the terminal. So I set up this system. I convinced my team to let me use them as guinea pigs to see how it worked out in our next project. I was like, don't worry, I'll be a safety net, I got you. So then we jumped into it. And this is the first thing that happened. I'm sure we're all very familiar with this screen, but if you're not used to using terminal, it looks terrifying. There's like glaring warning signs and errors, and your terminal's yelling at you. It looks like you have just caused a virus if you're not familiar. All this is like, oh, you don't have your node modules installed. Literally, that's what this is. But it looks terrifying if you aren't familiar. So this happens. And the way to work through this is through a lot of positive reinforcement and encouragement. So we really want to celebrate all the little wins on my team. And I started working with Ryan, because Ryan was really open to just trying out code, and he was a motion designer that I work with. I loved working with him. So he says, yay, successfully pushed code by myself. I updated the README, and that's exciting. What if we still had that visceral reaction every time we updated a README file and successfully pushed it? I would love that. So I, of course, sent gifts back. And we started celebrating every little win. We even started hashtagging little wins. And this hashtag was born from Brittany, who was another designer that I worked with on my team. And she sends me and Ryan this text message at like 10:30 p.m. on a Sunday night, just completely unsolicited. And so she screenshots her computer, and, well, not even screenshot, she took a photo so she could send it. And it says, I downloaded Unistarter environment on my own, again, LOL, and added a Sass attribute to change the text to Helvetica. Hashtag little wins, ha ha ha, I'm freaking out, okay, bye. It's like the best message you can get. So then there's just emojis, yay, OMG, yes. Like we're celebrating, we're doing these things together. It's exciting. And then here's Ryan, who tweeted, taught another designer Git today. Feducation is so contagious. Crazy to think I learned Git just 2 weeks ago. This is what happens when you don't make assumptions that somebody doesn't want to learn your system and work with you in this way. 2 weeks after he had never touched terminal to use Git, he was teaching other designers in the studio how to work with Git. And that itself just showed me that this is really powerful. It's this power of being excited and enticing people by just showing them how passionate you are about something. Telling a designer that they must learn to code will just make them defensive. This is what happens when you say, oh, you need to learn to do something. They'll come back with 20 reasons about why they don't need to learn how to do something. It's really destructive. I think it's really destructive for designers who want to learn how to code when they're being forced by all these developers who are saying, your job is not going to be useful if you can't give me code. So instead, if you share your excitement about that code with them, if you share the new tools that you're discovering, it makes them curious. And when they become curious, they come to you and they ask you for help. They ask you to set up their environment, and that's when you can really win. That's when you can shape that person to be able to provide the assets that you want. So we ended up using GitHub for our entire design team when we did the IBM Watson design library. And so we had our project management on there. We had user research on there. We had our user experience designers, visual designers, front-end developers, all working together in this repo. And it was a great way to share assets and have one common area that we could go to. So that's sort of how you encourage that more open designer-developer workflow. But that was on my team. What about in the greater open source community where it's a little bit harder to convince others? How do you foster design participation in this open source community? Well, I thought of a couple of tenets of what a good open accessible project would be. So that would be communication, accessibility, respect, and empathy. Let's start with communication. The first thing that you can do is let somebody know that you want their help. And you can do this by just creating things that are labeled design in your open issues on GitHub. And I'm seeing this more and more, which makes me really excited. But this way, designers can go and search for things that are open issues that are labeled design. They know where they can help. Another idea that we've been toying with, I'm also part of the Open Design Foundation, is creating this repository where you can throw up projects, but only accept projects that have a design section in the contributing.md document. So it's really good to have a contributing document so people know how to contribute, but how can they contribute design? It's somewhere they can go so they can see what already exists and where they can add to that. So what this does is you can add a project if and only if you have a design section. And that way, designers can go and find projects that are looking for design help and where people who maintain projects can go to put them up and look for designers. The third thing is to really be clear when you're writing your issues. So one of my favorite features of GitHub is this checkbox. And you can just go and check off all of these steps that you do when you get there. And then when you look at all your issues as a whole, let's see if I can zoom in here, you see this bar. It's a little blurry, but you can see if you've checked them off in Markdown, the percentage that you're done with the bar. So that's a really nice little project management tool that GitHub provides. Also being clear about what your project is doing. So having a very robust just README with images is great. What I like about this one is whenever they're explaining what something is inside the README, they're also highlighting it in red, so you know exactly what they're talking about. Using a lot of images. People in general just understand concepts better when they're matched with something visual than when it's just lines of text. It's really, really easy to use images on GitHub. All you have to do is drag and drop from your computer, and it supports PNGs, GIFs, and JPEGs. So this is a great tool for designers as well. As you're developing something, you can drag it in. You have a versioned history of something. You understand why you're making decisions. And you have this context to talk about within an issue. The next thing is accessibility. And I don't mean accessibility in the sense where like front-end developers worry about accessibility, can everyone use my app? I mean, can somebody get started with using it? So getting started documentation is really important. And this is what happens all the time. Like, you get on GitHub, you see a README, and it's just like, what is this? What does this mean? I mean, I know what it means. You probably know what it means. But somebody who doesn't know what NPM or gulp is, like gulp is when you drink something, you know? Grunt is just a weird word in general. What? I remember one time I submitted a pull request because someone didn't have any documentation, and it was like, oh, make sure people know to bundle install, just like a few steps. And the response that I got was, well, I have a gem file, you know, you should know to bundle install. And this is why we can't have nice things. Like that pull request got rejected. We can do better than this. Such a good gift. So when I set up the scope environment, I set up a really extensive like getting started documentation. And this might be even more than you may need to do, but I wanted anyone who landed on this to understand every single step without having someone need to explain it. So everything from like changing directory to what everything means, getting started, it was really robust in there. And I iterated a lot on that. Whenever a single designer got stuck in any step, I asked them to write it down for me, and I changed the README several times so that it was a little bit more lucid every time. A lexicon was another thing that we discovered was a really good idea when we did some iteration. Because there are all of these terms in this world, and I know that you understand this. Oi is all I can say about that. So having a lexicon is normally a good idea, especially when the same term could mean two different things to two different people. So here I just kind of define what things are, like sudo, cd, things that we think is second nature, but when you're starting out, you forget that these aren't something that you know off the bat. It's not like a common English word, sudo and cd and repo. So it's really good idea to have a lexicon just for a common understanding. And then one last study I did. This one comes with a disclaimer, though. So this study I just spent a weekend doing because I was curious. I thought I had this hypothesis that having visual assets within a GitHub repo would increase just the diversity of that team. I didn't know what the correlation was. I didn't know if there was a correlation. But I thought it was something interesting to start with. So I had to get a sample random repo. And all I really found to do this was the site called randomrepo.me. So I ended up sitting there clicking this random repository, bro, button. And that was awesome. So it would pop up a window with a random repository. And if it had more than 5 contributors, I clicked on the contribution list and pretty much stalked a lot of people online. So I just made this spreadsheet where I looked at the repo, I looked at the contributors, and I tried to differentiate if they had a male persona online or a female persona online, or if it was indeterminate. So I surveyed 43 projects. I looked at 938 contributors. 841 of them identified clearly as male. And what I did was I looked for photos. If they didn't have a photo that was a certain gender, then I looked at their name. If I couldn't tell, then it was indeterminate. But I'm not saying I'm a scientist at all. This is just my interpretation. So 13 of those were female. 76% I couldn't tell. There were a couple of bots in there, too. But I knew that I was getting somewhere when I got these last two numbers. 21% of projects had some gender diversity, which was really close to that number that we saw earlier, which was that 25% had some in any quarter in their entire existence. And then the last one, 1.5% of all contributors in open source are female. So that number actually matches almost exactly a survey by the FLOSS, which is Free, Libre, and Open Source Society, they did a couple years ago on how many contributors there are in open source that are female, and that was 1.4%. So I thought this is a relatively decent sample to at least experiment with. I told you I'm not a scientist. So of those 43 projects, I found that 63% of them had some kind of website or documentation or demo that was not in the README file, that was separate from the repository in them. I found that 26% of the projects with gender diversity at all also had a website documentation demo. This doesn't really tell me much. This is just up from the 5% baseline. But what was really interesting was that 85% of females contributed to projects that had a website or documentation or demo. So 85% of the females I found contributed, those projects had some kind of further documentation. And then 100% of the projects with more than one female contributor had a website or documentation or a demo. So what does this tell us? Does it tell us that documentation increases diversity or that diversity increases documentation? I don't know the answer to that. But hopefully we can continue these kinds of studies and see. The one thing that we can tell is that documentation is very important in general for any kind of GitHub project or any project. So I thought that was pretty interesting. The last thing that the next thing I want to look at is RESPCT, respect. And this is respect for design, respect for mediums. I love this quote by John Maeda. Design used to be the seasoning you'd sprinkle on for a taste, and now it's the flour that you need at the start of the recipe. And we see this with a lot of design thinking that is going on lately. So instead of designers being just, oh, let me throw a logo on it, let me make some kind of animated banana for funsies, they're doing some real research, defining problems, ideating, brainstorming, modeling and prototyping. So these things are development-driven steps that designers can definitely get involved in. And it's important to remember that when you're working on your projects, the designers aren't just there to make a logo for you or make something pretty. They're there to work with you and make your project better. Design is not just what it looks and feels like. Design is how it works. And this quote comes from Steve Jobs, who is famous for not compromising on design. That's what Apple is famous for. It's famous for saying, no, we have a standard and we're not going to rise below it. He really respected design. That was one of his staples. Design builds communities. It really does. So if we look at this logo, we can all immediately know what it is. We're here because there was something that unified us. A logo is like a visual shorthand for a complex concept. We have all of these logos on our projects, and when you see them, you can understand the gist of what someone is talking about. There's Node, React, Docker, Sass, there's so many logos out there. But instead of trying to explain to someone what this complex concept is that your project defines, you can use a logo as a shorthand. Here's a fun one. So this is my favorite issue of all time. It's issue number 37 on IO.js. So this is what happens when you have just this free-for-all definition of terrible design by committee. It's a really good one. That just is a cluster. This is a cluster of people submitting logo ideas. This is what happens when there's no constraints. So I think it starts out pretty well. And people are really well-intentioned, and they have these ideas. They're doing a little bit of conversation. I do speed up. This is really long. But it really downgrades pretty quickly. Just people start trolling. It gets really funny, so we could just watch that for a second. So, yeah. The best is still to come, trust me. So there's people playing on JavaScript, and then there's an eyeball. There's a sausage on a plate. And there's this guy. Yeah, I don't know. So I was talking to somebody at lunch about this, and he was wearing an IO.js t-shirt, and I asked him, oh, so when did they actually decide what the logo was going to be? And his answer was, oh, they didn't. The person who designed this logo made t-shirts. It's always a good sign. So see how long this video is? We haven't even gotten through half of it. There's, what is this? Anyway, issue number 37 is a really good one. So this is what we did on the open source design account. We had some kind of wrapper to go around. And we were actually collaborating here. We weren't just throwing things at a screen to be funny. We were building off of each other's ideas. And we were talking about what we liked about every iteration, what we didn't like, and just grew off that. So this is a much better solution to that problem when you have some kind of standards around what you're looking for. So a little less of a cluster here. There's no GIFs, but got some legit work done. And this kind of leads into the last point, which is having empathy for each other. So empathy is an evolutionary tactic. That's a fun fact for you. Empathy is what happens when somebody gets sick, and we don't decide to leave them behind the last town and continue to hunt and move on. We take care of our family members when they're sick, and that ends up strengthening our genetic bonds. We can cure that disease. The next time we get it, we become more immune. And it's because we have empathy for each other. That's where it stems from. So have empathy for the people that work on your open source projects. Why don't we treat them like our family? Open source is about people. There is someone handing out shirts here that's like says software is about people, and it's so true. But even more than that, open source, where you're trying to convince people to work on your team and work on your projects, you have to care about the people that are working on it with you. They're spending their time, and you have to respect that time. And don't be this guy. This is a well, actually, cat, which is a great little thing that you should put on your Slack channels when somebody does this. It's a good one. So there's a great blog post about this where it's just about the person trying to upstage each other. And 2 weekends ago, I went to a conference in Nashville where Kate Heddleson gave this great talk about diversity in the tech community. And one thing she mentioned was this argument culture that I didn't realize was there until I realized it was there. And what happens now is a really toxic environment where people are just trying to prove themselves as right. It's no longer about working together, it's about being the person who's right. So this is creating some really toxic culture inside of our development communities, and it can create a really toxic culture in your open source project or in any project. So definitely try to be careful for that and have empathy for each other. A great way to prevent this is having feedback guidelines. So the first thing I like to say is ask, don't tell. When you're doing a pull request, the first thing you can say is, why did you decide to use this function here or name this class something? Instead of saying, this is stupid, don't do that, without any explanation. Like asking why instead of making declarative statements is a much better approach. Be specific. Like when you're calling the move function on this line, I think that you should be doing this instead. Being specific, it definitely helps. Explain yourself, like checking out this blog post, or I would do something different, like this is what I would do. That's the next point, like offering solutions. Maybe try doing it another way. And in that blog post or some other explanation, like there could be a solution in there. Avoiding hyperbole. So trying to not say never do this, no, and don't, because these things are make somebody really kind of just crawl into themselves and not want to work on the project at all. It's something that's just makes someone feel bad. So try to avoid those words. The last thing is use emojis. I've learned that we love emojis today. And they're great. Like when you say something and add a smiley face, even though you might not think that your words are coming off in a certain manner, when you add emojis, it definitely makes the whole conversation a lot more level-headed. So one of the reasons I think that when we worked on our logo, it worked out so well is because when Simon first started the issue, he said, I want everyone's opinion on our logo. This is our thing. It's not an individual's thing. It's a community thing. Why a particular concept is great, why it fails, etc. I want to make sure that everyone's voice gets a chance to be heard, but I also want a positive conclusion to this conversation. So having that kind of mindset going in is really important. So communication, accessibility, respect, and empathy. And I'm a terrible person, but it makes this really cheesy acronym. But really, if you care about your project, then you care about having a diverse set of opinions working on it. And you'll want to do these things. So please think about this when you're working in open source, when you're even working in your own teams, in your own work environments. I just want to say thank you for having me.